Great, I think we're ready to start. Welcome back from lunch, everyone, and thank you for joining this first breakout session. You all know me from before. My name's Ruby, and I'm going to be moderating this session. We have two presentations. I should probably say first that this session is called Transforming Narratives and Own Your Own Culture. And we have two presentations. The first one will be from Louise Croff Blake, and the second one will be from Chepkemboi Mang'ira online. And I'm really glad that you can join and watch the first presentation, Chepkemboi. And after that, I will kick things off with a few questions. You may have questions for each other as presenters, and then we'll open it up and hopefully have a nice flowing conversation here with everyone present. So thank you for joining, and I will hand over to Louise for the first presentation.
Is it? Oh, okay. Could I please have my slideshow? Thank you. There it is. Okay, hi, my name's Louise. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. And I'm feeling a bit nervous, but I had this experience this week on Tuesday. For the first time in my adult life, I fell flat on my face in public. I've got the wound to prove it, blood everywhere, so embarrassing, and it reminded me that I can survive anything. So let's do this. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to start us at the beginning. Next slide. So, I'm a fashion practitioner. I was not always. When I was 25 years old, I started to come to terms with my queer gender identity. And I kind of, in tandem with this, became obsessed with fashion. Not high street fashion, but dress practices, because I found that how we dress our bodies is oftentimes one of the most important tools to coming home to ourselves as people living outside of binary genders. A couple years ago, I got accepted to study sustainable fashion at the Academy de Mode and Design in Berlin, Germany. And when I went to Berlin to do this program, I assumed that my work would be focused on making clothes for queer and trans people. I learned how to sew, learned how to design, went through all this work. But while I was there, I had a conversation with a friend that really shifted things for me. She expressed this frustration with not knowing where to shop from queer and trans designers, but she wanted to support them. She said, I don't know any. And I said, okay, but I do. I thought, what if I could make this project bigger than myself? You can see here, this is a line that I designed in undergrad. It was called Manual Body. I still love making clothes. I always want to make clothes, but I decided to gear this work instead towards creating an online hub for queer and trans fashion practitioners. Next slide, please. So QTFP, next slide. There we go. Okay, so first thing we need to talk about is what is queer gender. When you are assigned a gender at birth and you feel an internal congruence with yourself and the gender that you're taught, you are cisgendered. However, if you do not feel an alignment with the gender that you're assigned at birth, you are transgender, genderqueer, or non-binary. And this results in a feeling called gender dysphoria, this feeling of being wrong in your socialized body. Next slide, please. And so from that point, what you do is you go through a process of realignment. So if you are genderqueer, transgender, or non-binary, when you realign your innate sense of self with your external presentation, this generates a feeling called gender euphoria. This is one of the most important features of queer fashion. Next. So queer people have been using dress practices for a very long time for all kinds of, to achieve different things. For example, the concept of passing, so using dress in order to be perceived as the gender who you want to be. Signaling, so we see these amazing little documentations from Hal Fisher from Gay Semiotics, which is using coded dress to signal your queerness to others. And then on the right here, we have Alakmed Vaid Manon, who's one of my favorite queer gender theorists, who talks a lot about the importance of gender euphoric dress. So again, using dress practices to come home to yourself. Next. And when you ask the question, who can provide the tools for facilitating gender euphoria, the answer is queer and trans fashion practitioners. I love this shot from the London queer fashion show from 2019. You get to see kind of like how expressive queer fashion can be. And I started to think that this isn't just about designers. This is about finding a queer fashion ecosystem. You know, there are so many different fashion practices that play into creating this world that we want to build for ourselves. Next. So the fashion practices I started focusing on kind of fall into these 7 buckets: design, media, services, theory, retailers, collectives, and solo practitioners. And through this range of practices, we celebrate diversity, multiplicity, and our interdependencies, which is this ecosystemic approach. Next. And so, thank you. As I was developing this online hub, I also, because I was doing it in an academic context, was pulling from these 4 different key buckets of theory. Next. So from queer theory, I was pulling concepts of fluidity, multiplicity, and subversion practices. I was researching DIY anarchism and learning about horizontalism, direct action, and prefiguration, which I will explain later. Learning from hacktivism, because we are occupying online space, so repurposing digital tools to create a political online realm. And then the concept of xenofeminism, which I mentioned this morning, which is centering marginalized voices in kind of building this future on the internet for ourselves. Next. And initially this started as a databasing project. I wanted to catalog queer and trans fashion practitioners, but as I was talking more and more with the community, I realized that we don't need to just be data-based. We're not just data points. What we need is a community of practice. So I started using this term Rolodex. So it's a contact book. We're all data-based in it, but it's actually a through line where we can connect with each other. Next. So here's the tool itself. I was working with a web developer from my own queer community, which has been amazing to be able to kind of get this like multi-categorial databasing approach. Next, you can see each QTFP has their own little profiles, and they're not totally complete yet. We're still very much in the web development process, but this is kind of a glimpse of what it looks like. And then the secret ingredient, next, is actually this internal forum that we also participate in. So we organize on Discord, and this is where we implement like DIY anarchist techniques in terms of our organization. Everything is completely horizontal. You can still see on the left-hand panel, we have channels for being able to talk about mutual aid, skill and resource sharing, collaboration opportunities. And this is the through line that allows us to kind of find awareness of each other. Next. You can see people are being all cute and introducing themselves on our little introductions channel. Next. Okay. So this is where prefiguration comes into play, which is this really key concept I learned from anarchist theory, which is an ideological consistency between the means and the ends of what you do. So if we want to create a radical online space, we have to practice radical ideals in our day-to-day operations. Or next, as a queer icon Dr. Frankenfurter says in Rocky Horror Picture Show, don't dream it, be it. Next. So in order to build the queer fashion future that we want to see, which allows all of us to experience gender euphoria, we, in the process of building this platform, need to practice solidarity, collaboration, acknowledging each other's multiplicity, and also channeling a really real financial investment in QTFP, which then leads to a divestment from corporate fashion systems. Next. And my friend Jake Shim, who's a really brilliant designer in Berlin, said that this is all going to lead to building a new fashion scape that is composed of folks like us. I love that phrasing. Next. And we are officially online. You can scan this QR code to visit the Rolodex. Like I said, the database itself is we're still web developing some of the kinks out of it, but if you or anybody you know is a queer or trans fashion practitioner and you'd like to join the project, We have some people represented here today, which is very exciting to me. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Louise. Yeah, I have questions already, but I think what we'll do is we'll go to Chepkemboi, have the second presentation, and then hopefully it can be a little bit back and forth. Is that okay with you? Yeah? Does anyone have burning questions first that can't wait? Okay. Then we'll move to the online space. Hello, Chepkemboi. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share my work with you guys and to interact and to have a conversation about this. To give a bit more about my work, OwnYourCulture is an online platform that is decolonizing fashion using traditional jewelry. Within this virtual community, we do this through styling of traditional jewelry with regular clothes, just the way I'm dressed, and sharing the images. The image on here is a snippet of the Instagram page. The purpose of this platform is to showcase the importance of traditional jewelry as fashion as opposed to ceremonial attire or crafts. We look at fashion as a form of self-expression, which it was in ancient Kenya. Elaborately done jewelry showcased the owner's personal style, which community they were from, marital status, and wealth. This work is important because Kenyan original fashion has been discarded in favor of Western fashion, thus leaving behind tons of our original fashion, history, and creativity. In creating the OwnYourCulture framework and platform, I took the practical approach. I worked with bead artisans to rebirth lost accessories. The images would be those that I collect from the museum archives on historical Kenya. And we would work together to recreate these pieces. For example, in this image of a Kipsigis woman in 1970s, we redesigned her accessories, such as the headband that I am wearing. Prior to our design, this piece had never been made again in nearly 50 years because our ancestors were forced in their traditional fashion. We now use photography and nurturing this virtual community where we experiment with traditional fashion aesthetics. I use my body as a canvas of style exploration. Every single day for the past 7 years, I have worn different styles of traditional jewelry from around Eastern Africa, and I document it online, which has taken a lot of unlearning and relearning what fashion means to me. I have made use of multiple methods of research, from oral stories to images of Kenya from the past century. I then share these images with the online community. We were never taught much about our traditional fashion history, and it has been fascinating to see the conversations that happen online on this. To further this work within the fashion industry, I collaborated with stylists, musicians, and influencers. Posts of celebrities styled in traditional aesthetics performed very well. I've also collaborated with other institutions and individuals to take the work offline across the country through festivals and workshops. And it has been interesting to see the reactions and the further we move from the city. Social media has created a unique space that enables interactions across the fashion value chain. We have been able to share knowledge from artisans, from museums, and even online users submitting stories or design techniques taught to them by their grandparents. For example, this is a snippet of a video where someone's grandmother shows her how to weave a basket called a kiondo. The kiondo is a woven basket from sisal. The design technique is shared from generation to generation amongst women. The kiondo bag is handmade by women from central Kenya, and that is the Kamba and Kikuyu women. The cornerstone of OwnYourCulture is reclaiming our historical narrative, taking back our histories and stories and telling the truth of it. On this slide are variations of the kiondo bag. On the left side of the screen is a modern version by a contemporary designer known as Wazawazi, while on the right side is an original kiondo bag. So to date, kiondo bags are still made in more or less the similar or the same design. At OwnYourCulture, it has been and still is important for us to look at the multiplicity of what constitutes beauty and fashion. We see and understand that beauty and self-expression are so diverse, and there is beauty in diversity. When we put our ancestral fashion into context, it is obvious that one standard of beauty or fashion is not an effective set point for billions of humans. We decided to look back at images of ancient Kenya and use that as our beauty and fashion standard, at the same time keeping an open mind to the new modes of self-expression. In our work, it's important for us to see wholeness, to see ourselves as whole, and to see our wholeness currently and in the past too, to remove the idea of inferiority when it comes to our ancestral fashion. We are enough as we are. We have always been enough, and so is our fashion and our art. Expressing this work practically and looking at myself as a globally exposed Kenyan woman in love with the art of fashion, I'm always asking myself, what does self-expression look like for me? What role does my historical fashion play? These have been the guidelines I use in making my style choices and as well as guiding the OwnYourCulture community. In this work, we are always experimenting with traditional jewelry to create our own aesthetics. For example, how many necklaces can we wear at a go? How much beadwork can our head support? How much beads can we put in our braids and in our dreadlocks? In this work, we honor the fact that traditional fashion was a part of life, not just for ceremonies. In transforming narratives and working together, we can also learn from each other's fashion systems and histories. For example, in northern Kenya, they would melt old aluminium pots known as sufuria to make beads that would be used in making necklaces. The melted aluminium is rolled into cube-like beads and used to create beautiful necklaces, such as the image of the lady that you can see there. This is the signature hairstyle, a mid part at the center and braids on each side of the head, and jewelry of the Borana women from northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia. A common design aesthetic throughout Kenyan style history is circular necklaces, such as the one in this image. The necklaces are made of wire and beads, and plastic strips are used as holders in necklaces to hold it together. The vertical white strips on the necklace are made of recycled plastic tins. This necklace is about 20 inches in diameter. This style of necklace ranges from different sizes and comes in different colors, and it depends whether it is made for a young child or a woman or an adult woman. In the past, animal leather was used to hold up the necklace. Nowadays, artisans use plastic or coiling the wire at different sections of the necklace to firm it up. The plastic provides a very beautiful design. This design is proof that ancestral fashion was not static, but did evolve throughout the century. It is rare to find a retailer in Kenya selling these plastic strips. The artisans usually prefer to use discarded plastic tins instead. Perhaps this is a very common image or a well-known image. This is an image of a pair of recycled tire sandals, popularly known as Akala sandals. The sandals are made from old car or motorbike tires and come in various designs and styles. Akala sandals are known for their durability. This particular style is mostly worn by men. The beadwork colors and patterns that you can see in the image are those of the Kenyan national flag. Here are some ways I believe we can work together to create a healthier fashion industry. We can start by looking at how fashion stories are being told, for example, in schools and in the media, sharing and learning about the other fashion systems. Fashion has existed for centuries throughout the world and has evolved in different ways too. There also exists a need to expand the global view of what qualifies as fashion. Fashion is too diverse to fit neatly into a box. Most of all, for us who have been historically marginalized, we need to start taking ownership of our narratives, telling our own stories and taking ownership of them. Now that we are here, what are the ways that we can work together? One of them is the fashion industry moving away from needing to monopolize fashion. There is room for diversity. Understanding that beauty is multifaceted as is human self-expression. What works for one side doesn't work for everybody else. We can also start by accepting that there is no threat in diverse expressions, which ties into recognizing other living beings as whole in themselves, with their own story, with their own histories, with their own styles, uniqueness, and preferred style expressions. We should also respect others' history and hear them out, not buying into old stories about others' fashion systems in other parts of the world. We can educate ourselves, read about them online or in books. We can also just begin where we are. Start with asking ourselves, what can I do right now to create a wholesome fashion industry? Then being aware of the type of work that we put out and we produce. Consistently being aware of what stories we are perpetuating in our work. Fashion is very powerful and influential, as we all know. And finally, recognizing the beauty in our diversity. We cannot expect everyone to be the same. Give space for everyone to express themselves freely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chepkemboi. Really two very touching presentations, and I think there's some overlaps that I'd like to start to tease out. But first, I have some questions for you both specifically. Louise, I am really interested in this transformation that I see happening often, and I've also experienced myself, from the designer or fashion practitioner into a facilitator or someone who brings people together. And I'm wondering if you have a sense that in some way the skills of designing or working with fashion are akin to this role of bringing people together, or why do we see that? Why do we see people who are working in fashion being good at facilitating this coming together? I don't know if anyone else feels the same, but I see it happening.
Check, chat. Oh, it's back. I think that's a really interesting trend that you're noticing, because I don't know that I necessarily have the awareness of the same thing, not because it's not there, but because I actually haven't really spent that much time in fashion communities of practice. My background originally was in art. And so for me, the reason why I transitioned, I think, so easily from, really like being like, okay, now I'm going to be a designer, to stepping back into a community organizing role, is I've been in queer and trans art collectives for my entire adult life. Like, starting as soon as I graduated undergrad for the first time, it was the most organic place to work from, was on a grassroots level. And I think that this is something that's maybe even more inherent to queer community than it is to fashion communities. Like, it makes sense with fashion because it's so many roles. And I was actually reading some really interesting studies about how, like, purely like individual DIY fashion practitioners and designers specifically, oftentimes like their businesses don't work out because it's too much to take on by yourself. So it makes sense that, like, in a DIY fashion community, there would also be this big, like, lean towards community organizing. But as queer people, we structure our communities around chosen family. Like, especially after the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and 1990s, queer people were taught to literally provide end-of-life care to each other. And so part of our legacy is showing up for each other through mutual aid and fostering this kind of love and inter-alliance that I think is actually quite unique, that translates really beautifully into also making a fashion community.
That's a really important perspective, and I think that those practices of care and taking care not only of each other but of the community then as it grows are really transferable, and we can learn from that. And I wondered, Chepkemboi, do you have a similar feeling of this transition between the making process or being a design practitioner and moving into a space where you're facilitating a platform or that enables people to come together?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's a lot about needing to have a space or a community where we can also celebrate our own stories and ourselves, because we think about like what happens to, what my great grandmother used to wear. And I mean, like what would she do if she came here and she saw us? So this community came about because we wanted to start telling our own fashion stories. We were not satisfied about or with what we were reading or maybe the fashion standards which are out there. We wanted to look back and see for ourselves what fashion was based on our people's stories, our people's histories, how they used to style themselves. So that one just came about, I think it was out of necessity. So you just find yourself creating this space. And I guess also with having social media platforms, you sort of find yourself creating a community. Even if you're a designer, maybe through sharing your work, you get people who are interested in your pieces. So you end up creating a community just out of the space of social media.
And then I guess following on from that, I'm interested in how this role and these processes of building and maintaining and caring for a community then feed back into your work as a maker and as a practitioner. Are you aware of the ways that it influences what you make, how you make?
Yes, there's a lot of influence because for a long time, especially in the past, people were not comfortable wearing these pieces because, it was taught to them during the colonial period that, this is associated with witchcraft, or if you wear this type of jewelry, maybe you're not a Christian, and that kind of thing. So for many Kenyans, especially of a certain generations, they're very shy when it comes to these pieces, wearing these pieces. So some people or some customers or users online would say, they prefer maybe wearing a smaller necklace or maybe in the black and white colors because if they're going to the office or if they're going to school, or maybe they'd feel shy about wearing, headpieces like the one that I'm wearing because maybe at their workplace they cannot wear such things. So sometimes as a maker, I start to look at things in that perspective. I'm like, okay, how do these people want to appreciate their culture? What else can we do for them? Can we turn these necklaces into perhaps maybe wall art pieces that they can hang in their homes, or can we make them into key holders that they can carry, or to earrings which they can wear in different spaces? So there's that mix of the influence of the consumer wants to appreciate and participate in their culture, but they're still feeling maybe shy about wearing the pieces that they see. They've still not unlearned what they've been taught. So for us, it influences me in that way. Yeah.
Thank you. And for you, Louise, are you making clothes?
Hello? Okay. Sorry. I'll stop turning it off. Finally, again, I've been able to get back into the studio. And after I've spent the past 5 years back in school again, and it feels so good to just finally, after graduating last month, be able to get back into making, because I think when you're especially playing an organizing role with other incredible creatives, at the end of the day, you're just going to end up intensely inspired. and you wanted to stay a part of that conversation. So slowly, I've been kind of revitalizing my practice as well.
Well, congratulations on graduating.
Thank you.
And how do you see the influence of this role and your experience of the facilitation and building community? How does that feed back into your design process, or even your experience of making clothes?
I mean, I think, as I touched on before, the one thing that is so powerful is because, especially making clothing is so labor intensive, realizing that I have a network with whom I can collaborate now that I didn't necessarily have before, and seeing, what is, the sum is always greater than the parts. And so just having this excitement for what is going to come in the future when I merge my vision with somebody else's, and then also witnessing what happens when two of my peers merge their visions. I think that's really at the heart of it for me.
Yeah, so you get these intersections happening through the facilitation of that. Then, it's nice to see how that circulates.
Exactly, yeah.
I had another question about, both of you are really exploiting and I use that word consciously, the website as a platform to kind of facilitate these communities, and using social media and online, the online space, I guess, as the space where people connect, perhaps initially. And I would imagine that you're both interested in also connections happening in physical spaces and in other ways. And I wondered if you could talk a little. We often acknowledge the power of the online and social media in creating these communities, but I'm interested maybe more in what are the difficulties that this space poses, and how do you, or the downfalls, and how do you deal with those? Because it obviously does offer an incredibly rich way to create connections, but there are compromises, I think. But I'm interested to hear your perspectives.
I think for us, disagreements, like online disagreements, people easily get angry at each other and talk about all sorts of negative things amongst themselves. It's been very difficult to sort of kind of moderate that, because this person feels a certain way and this other person feels this other way. So they just go all out and spew all these negative stories. That has been one of the most difficult things. And also sometimes sifting through and finding what is accurate and not accurate, because someone can come and say, oh, this is what I know from my community, or someone can make up a story of some kind, or other times maybe negative comments on maybe some of the images that we've posted, or having some social media sites flagging some images because of maybe the poses that the models were in, or these historical photos of Kenya. There's a lot of photos of topless women, so that is always flagged on all social media platforms. So dealing with that, because in some parts of the country, that is not really a big deal. Women are respected, but even if they walk topless, it's not seen in a sexual way. But when you post it on something like Instagram, it will flag it as something to do with nudity. So having that sort of like cultural balance, because the founders of Instagram, and then we have also our own types of photographs and content here. So those are some of the challenges that I've experienced.
Yeah, I think that's a good and specific example to point out, and making us aware also that that social media platforms sit within certain and specific systems of value and moral judgment, and that those are not the same everywhere. Louise, do you?
Yeah, and I mean, just branching off that, especially when you're working with pre-established systems like Instagram, you're not always in control of their quote-unquote community guidelines. You're kind of at the whim of this evil giant, and that feels bad most of the time. But at the same time, coming into a trans-pandemic, post-pandemic reality where we are now, I think that we can't really move back from being integrated into digital spaces, and we've learned it can bring us so much connectivity that really did not exist and that wasn't normalized before. So I do think that it's the right direction to move in. We also are in this weird stage where, like, you know, at the development of the internet, there was so much optimism about, you know, building a new world that was like totally like everybody was on equal footing. And actually it's just come to completely replicate the dynamics of capitalism and like every dynamic that we already have within society. And so the bad things in our society not only are present, but they're unregulated. So especially when starting a platform for queer people, one of the biggest concerns is going to be safety and hate speech.
Yes.
Because while visibility is incredibly important, you know, making ourselves have like an autonomous stand, you know, that is net good for sure, but it's also a vulnerable position that we put ourselves in when all of a sudden anybody who's clicking through can see these people, can learn about you as an individual. And so I think that that is a risk that we need to navigate as we go forward. And like, I don't take that risk lightly, starting a platform like this either.
And I guess it's something that everyone as an individual has experience with, but perhaps the benefit can be that then within that collective space there can be ways to navigate that generated through the community rather than just having to take it on as an individual.
Definitely, and I mean, one of the reasons why anarchist theory is so important to this project is that the kind of the group decision-making about how we deal with transgressions, it needs to be democratically decided upon. So like our community guidelines are something that we're in the process of writing democratically. Like that is kind of like the next big project on the horizon for the community itself, I think. And then also just really allowing everybody the autonomy to participate in a way that is comfortable for them. So, you know, there are people in there who don't have their real name on it, who don't have photos of their face because they're not comfortable being exposed in that way on the internet. And that's really important to allow people to make that choice for themselves as well.
Yeah. And Chepkemboi, you mentioned sometimes the tensions and a real accuracy in terms of what's presented online and how to kind of manage that. And I think that's important across the board, but especially when we're talking about a kind of ownership or bringing home of one's culture and maintenance of it. Points around kind of accuracy and even authenticity can become really complex. And I wondered if you could talk just a little bit more about how you approach that, because, you know, accuracy is also a subjective understanding in many cases, as is authenticity, and how you navigate different people's perspectives on what is, you know, the kind of traditional culture, or to what extent it can be made contemporary or not. Those kind of discussions.
What I did was I tried to sort of just be a teacher and a guide instead of putting myself in the conversation and telling people, no, this is the wrong beadwork, this is the wrong thing. So I tried to mostly use kind of like the right words and guide them and teach them. So one of the things that we did on the platform is having like different days where we have different things showcasing different styles, and these styles and photos that I would share were things that I would research from the museum and also check the accuracy through museums. And I also used to do, and I still do, various trips to different communities and talk to various elders, listen to their fashion descriptions, their style descriptions. And then from there, I also interact with the people of the museum, archaeologists, anthropologists, and also getting their perspectives, double checking and cross checking the books that I also reference, so that I'm also telling accurate stories. And so far, I've been able to, I mean, in 7 years of doing this kind of research, now I'm able to tell the styles and the techniques that come from different communities and which ones belong to which communities. And then on the social media page, just consistently posting and tagging and indicating and writing and just always referencing where these photos came from, which areas these photos came from, because again, with some historians, some of them did, or not historians necessarily, let's say the missionaries, who would take like different photos and then they would assign like, this woman or this man is from this place. But when you counter check maybe with the local anthropologists, they would say this is not accurate because maybe this was from someone in a neighboring town and a different community. So I try to also highlight those differences. And right now it's reached a point in the community where many users and many members are able to tell the differences, but I still keep on educating and showcasing and sharing the stories, and also having the input of different experts in the anthropology sector, or authors or historians. Yeah.
Thank you. Ongoing work, I can hear from both of you. There's there's work to be done. And I have one more question, which I guess is a bit more abstract, and then I'll open it up to the audience. You mentioned something, Louise, this idea of coming home to your, I think you said body. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I sensed it also in what you were talking about, Chepkemboi, this idea of coming home to a culture, or to even to particular objects that have a really strong connection to a sense of place or a sense of home. And this idea really resonates with me. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and also reading some Sarah Ahmed, who particularly queer phenomenology, talking about positioning oneself, what it means to make home, or homemaking as a practice, both literally but also kind of metaphorically. And with that as a sort of context, I just wanted to open it up to both of you to maybe talk about what this means to you, this idea of coming home, whether it's in a literal sense, or through the work that you're doing. I'm sorry if it's too vague.
No, it's a really good question. Chepkemboi, do you want to go first?
Okay, I can go fast.
Okay.
For me, I think it was mostly personal, because as a child, I grew up in different parts of the country and I interacted with all these different communities, and also grew up around different African and Indian nationalities, and I would see how they observed and they participated and were so proud of their culture, their names. And I always wondered, what about my own community? And also, when we were studying history from childhood, and we're being told these different stories of how we moved across the continent, how we came to be. I always wondered, what did my people used to do back in the day? And then also, both my grandmothers had these beautiful piercings that they used to have. So their earlobes were elongated, and they had these very unique piercings. And I always used to wonder why they stopped wearing those accessories. So for me, it came from a really personal family perspective, and it was something that started from childhood. And as I grew up, I started falling in love with fashion around adolescence. And I was always reading all these different magazines from the UK and the US, and seeing all these different people. But at the back of my mind, I was like, okay, I am Kenyan. How can I express my own sense of fashion, especially coming from or looking at my historical perspectives? Because sometimes in these magazines, I would read like, oh, my grandmother used to advise me a woman should, maybe have pearls. And in my country, I'm like, I've seen pearls before, but I don't think my grandmother would tell me about pearls. So it's just thinking about, for me, it was mostly a family, a sort of personal identity thing. Yeah, I wanted to have a sort of ownership of my history and my identity completely, like from my history to myself, to how I present myself. So even with my names, the names that I use are my Kenyan names. I don't use my English name. So it's a lot to do with my personal identity.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, I would have to say that home is not a particularly concrete recipe, and it has a lot of moving parts to it. I mean, first and foremost, home is where the people are. I think, Theodore, you said something this morning that was very touching. That is, in your queer community, you don't have to explain yourself to people, and that is a huge part of it. But there is also this other component, which is embodiment. And this morning I was also asked what embodiment has to do with my practice, and I kind of froze a little bit because it goes so deep. Like, fashion is armor, fashion is experimentation and exploration, but when it comes to true embodiment as a trans person, this is something that's a little bit different, that is, I think, at the core of the sense of home. And like, on my own journey, I'm just starting the process of transitioning. I've only just tried testosterone for the first time, actually, and that sense of embodiment is the truest feeling of coming home that I've ever felt in my life. And I didn't know that that was possible. And I also couldn't do that if I didn't have the community who could relate to this experience as well. So this sharing and support of being on a really radical frontier within yourself, like, that, to me, that goes deeper than fashion. That goes, like, that's sense of solidarity that you need to feel first and foremost with yourself, that can be so hard to cultivate, that I think is a lifelong journey. So I'm figuring out what home is actively. Yeah, sorry, that's quite personal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you both for sharing those personal stories. I think it's important, and I hope my question wasn't too probing. Very touching. I've got goosebumps. Does anyone else want to add anything or ask a question? I can come to you with a mic, or you can use one of the ones on the table. We can also just sit for a while.
Could I actually ask a question to Chepkemboi? Because one thing that is really interesting to me about turning these practices that are very culturally located into the digital realm is you start to engage in this more global conversation about what you're doing. And I'm curious, like, in your ideal, like, your fashion utopia, like, what way would Kenyan fashion and you know, your dress practice with jewelry, how would that engage in an international context? Like, how would you like to hear people talking about Kenyan fashion?
I think, well, let me say, the way that I'm dressed, I don't want to be asked if I'm in a costume or if I'm going, to dance, or if I'm going for a Halloween party. This is just a fashion choice. There's nothing more to it. This is a beauty and a fashion choice. I've gone through photos of the past, and that's what different Kenyan people used to wear. And for me, it's a personal fashion choice. So I think it would be more of people to stop assuming that, just because I'm dressed in like many pieces of jewelry, or if I have a big headpiece, I'm headed to a party of some sort, or I'm headed to a ceremony. This is just how life used to be back in the day. So I think just respecting and not labeling other people's fashion systems without finding out the story or the history behind it first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kind of the same question, but back to you. How do you relate your practice to the cishet community in a way?
Well, that's interesting, because like cishet fashion is obsessed with queer people right now, which is interesting and cool, but also kind of fraught. I think at the end of the day, it can be so fun to share this kind of really wild gender experimentation and exploration, and I do think that that's something that everybody can do, but what I want to see it accompanied by is actual, like, not allyship, but accompliship, like an active participatory role in like fighting for queer and trans rights. So, it doesn't matter if people are watching RuPaul's Drag Race, if like trans people are still being murdered, you know, like there has to be an active political component to people's appreciation of queer and trans practices. And as long as they're doing that work and like being, you know, accomplices and not just verbal allies, then I'm like, party's open, like everybody can benefit from this.
I'll move to this mic. Is it on? Yes. How can I make use of the Rolodex of Radical Design.xyz?
That's a great question. Well, you can join if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay.
And then?
And then, I mean, it started out as literally trying to conglomerate queer and trans designers so that people could know where to shop. Like the first conception of it was a shopping platform, and then I remembered that I'm an anarchist and I wanted to take the focus off of consumption. But you can use it for that. I think I also really want it to be at this point of collaboration. You know, there are so many more practices than just design practices on there, and working with queer and trans people, hiring queer and trans models and photographers. Like, this is supposed to be a fully autonomous form of visibility, and if you are an accomplice or an ally and you want to, you know, support this cause, then like financially and collaboratively engaging with these people is how you can use, that's what the site is designed to be.
And where are people mostly located? Is it mostly in Berlin or all over the world?
Well, it's a baby project right now, so it's kind of starting with my network, which is primarily based in Seattle, Washington, New York, and Berlin, but we have people in Arnhem now. And really, like, I think it would be amazing to make it as global as possible because, you know, the more different our stories, the more we have to learn from each other, and that's the type of discourse I want to see happening on the internal side of this platform. So please join. Tell all your friends.
I will.
Wow. Yeah, it's something. Does it work? Oh, is it okay now? It's my first time ever. It's something quite different. Maybe because we're something deeper. I've written it down. Maybe you can relate to it. Oh, I have to hold it like this? This is good? Yes? I don't know your name. It's... Okay, I have to practice that. You said diversity is not a threat. And first of all, I've written down there is beauty in diversity. That's something I completely can relate to. But it goes deeper than that. Diversity sustains life. You know, it's for me, all life is equal. Ants as well as people. We're all living creatures. And I've written down something because I've got a psychology background, and it just hit me because you said something about shy, and I immediately have written down ashamed and afraid. You know, that's going deeper. And the killing of queers, you know, that really hurts me. You know, I feel like I want to cry or something because, I don't know, I have to identify myself, but I've had experienced violence against women. And I noticed sometimes when I go salsa dancing or something, it's always people of different genders who come to me and dance with me or come to me, you know, and I'm, as far as I know, I'm heterosexual, is that the word in English? And people said, yeah, I can relate to that, you know, I can see it, but I don't know, maybe deep down, I don't know, but I can't think of it. But it really hits me lately more and more often. People feel safe with me. They know on a deep level, they know they're safe with me. That's why they come and ask me to dance with them, you know, because I won't reject them. Okay, we have fun, you know. It's for me, it's all bullshit, all these labels, you know. We're human beings. And for me, it's such painful. I'm a person, I'm building here eco-villages, you know. We want to live in the future, and I'm very concerned with the planet. And I go further than democratic levels. We do sociocratics. Democratic is not enough, you know, to work all together and have to hear everybody. You say this in English? But it goes so much further what you do with your garment and your fashion. It's really sustaining life. Diversity is the answer to life, you know, it's life itself. So your expression for me, it's an expression of life, you know. And what you are trying to do is an expression of life, and that you have to be afraid. It's really horrible. I can relate to that. I was in a Norman community, but I was too eco-friendly and they tried to kill me. So there's something going on in the world. And I've written down something, it's in Dutch, so I have to translate it. You see all these guys in their suits, you know, all the politicians, they're all dressed in the same suits. It's so very, very boring, you know. And what I see as well, in other societies, you know, they adapt to Western standards and they put on a suit, and I think it's so boring. It's, oh, what a waste of culture, you know. Why is this so good? It's a boring Western suit, you know. And it's, I don't say the names, but it's a suit culture. And I have a background of psychology, and everybody looks the same. But when you put on the suit, you're somebody. I think you're boring. And I'm imagining now Greta Thunberg standing in front of all these suits, you know, screaming out, you know, I want a future for my generation. And it suddenly says, in war, if you go to be a soldier, the first thing they strip you of is your identity. They put you all in identical uniforms. Okay, it's nice in the desert, you know, they can't be seen. But I know that the main thing behind it is if you stripe away the identity by putting on all, you know, uniform suits, it makes the killing easier. So for me, suddenly it struck me, this suit culture, we have to get rid of it, you know? It makes it easier to kill queer people, you know? Put on your jeans and your sweaters or your suits, to, you know, to, I say that you have a higher standard. It's wrong. It's a soldier's mentality. We need diversity. And it's so horrible that we are afraid to show it. I struggle with it myself as well. But you feel it coming out, you know, and that's just life force itself that wants to be seen. I think it's the, how you say this? The future of our planet. Yes.
Do either of you want to respond to that, or this idea of diversity as life or identity? Yeah.
Do you have a response?
You don't have to.
I mean, I agree with you. I agree that, you know, biodiversity is the one lesson that we're taught to not pull from nature because it actively challenges systems of hegemony. And I think that the violence against queer people is a lot more complex than just being suit culture. It goes a lot deeper than just, you know, homogeneity, but I agree that celebrating, like the uniformity that we're taught is a symbol of power, is kind of how the power upholds itself, is the facelessness, definitely.
Thank you. I'm realizing that we're out of time because I think some people might want to go to a next session. So I want to just really warmly thank Louise and Chepkemboi for presentations, for your openness and your generosity today. And thank you, everyone, for being here and contributing and listening to the conversation. Thank you very much.